Well, thanks for watching Morning Live. Now, according to a recent News 24 report, a power utility Eskom could have to consider instituting private prosecutions against individuals linked to state capture and corruption at the state-owned entity. And this follows allegations that the National Prosecuting Authority has made little progress in various cases that have been referred to the law enforcement agency. And whether Eskom is indeed intending to go the private prosecution route is yet to be confirmed, but questions have been raised about the lack of visible inroads by the NPA to prosecute high-profile state capture-related cases that are already before the institution. Hennie van Vuuren is the Director of Open Secrets and an author, and he joins us now for further discussion on this. Hennie, good to see you again. Welcome to Morning Live.
Morning, Sakina. Yeah, good to be here. Thank you.
So, Hennie, Eskom couldn't confirm the media reports when we approached them, but is that a route or a possibility that Eskom can pursue private prosecutions due to the frustrations because of the time that has lapsed and is continuing to lapse in these cases?
Sakina, I think the frustration that the public feels and that the frustration of the leadership of Eskom should feel as the custodians of that entity, and frankly the ministers that are responsible for the management of Eskom, should also be saying we need to see action and we need to see it now. And we're not seeing it from the side of the National Prosecuting Authority with any amount of vigor that we as the public should expect. Given the level of the crimes, the amount of information that's been uncovered at the Zondo Commission, the amount of work that's been done by the investigative journalists and the media generally to expose the rot of state capture in state-owned enterprises like Eskom, I think it's crucial that we use as many tools as we can, and tools that are within the strict defines of the law, and ensure that there is not only accountability, but that we don't repeat those offences. So the idea of private prosecutions, I think, are definitely attractive ones that should be led by the state-owned enterprises. I think Transnet has been considering a similar process, potentially, or at least at the very least, civil claims against some of those companies that have been implicated in high-level corruption and state capture. And as you say, the requirement of the process around these civil processes, the bar is not set as high as criminal prosecution. So you could have a much speedier resolution and at least see elements of accountability. So what might need to happen is a kind of a paring out to say, look, in certain instances, we must follow criminal prosecutions. These are high-level individuals, politicians and corporations that must be held to account. We need to see executives and directors of certain companies go to prison for their action because they've done this over and over again, and the same accounts for politicians. And in other instances, I think the decision is made that it's just going to be, frankly, possibly too hard for us to prosecute, or we don't have the capacity to do that. They aren't in our top priority cases, and you allow this process of civil prosecutions to take place. This, of course, needs the approval of the National Director of Public Prosecutions. And Sakina, I think that comes down to a question: who is coordinating this entire strategy? Do we have a game plan, so to speak, of how we're going to go about doing this? And I don't think the public has a sense that Advocate Shamila Batoyi is at the moment clearly leading a strategy to ensure that we tackle the entire network that has benefited from state capture over the last 10 years.
So it raises a further question about what is going on behind the scene, what's going on at the NPA, because as you would remember, there was much positivity and anticipation when Shamila Batoyi was appointed as head of the NPA. That was in December 2018, which is almost 3 years ago now. And there were other significant appointments as well. Hermione Cronje comes to mind subsequently to stabilize the institution. But what's your review of their track record so far? What is going on at the NPA?
Yeah, I think it's very hard for outsiders to understand exactly what's going on inside the institution at the moment, Sakina. But I think what is clear is that there do seem to be certain forces, if you like, and individuals that are very much in favor of accountability and seeing that we do see processes of prosecutions. And I would broadly place people like Advocate Cronje and some of her colleagues within that camp. At least we've seen that through their actions. But I think there are certainly many individuals within the NPA who have no interest in accountability, who have worked very long, not only as a political project to slow down any intention to ensure accountability. They've done that with cases involving apartheid crimes and crimes against humanity, and they continue to do that with high-level corruption. For some of those individuals, it's political. It's about ensuring that you don't see accountability. And for some of those individuals, there is little desire to see anything move within the NPA because not having, frankly, to do the work suits them very well. And Sakina, what that means, I think twofold, is that you need to see the kind of leadership within the NPA that roots out these individuals and puts them, every single one of them, on warning, that they get warning letters. There are officials who represent the public within the NPA, which is an independent institution. And the question I would ask is this, is why is there not sufficient pressure being placed on Advocate Batoy, for example, not interference by the Minister of Justice, Minister Arnold Lamola, to say, well, what is it that we can do to fix this place? How do we ensure that you bring in a new cadre of young, dynamic prosecutors who are going to lead this institution, and that we root out the old establishment that is seeking as a rearguard action to undermine your work, if that's what you claim is happening? And what resources do you really need? And I don't think we see that very clearly with Minister Lamola saying, right, give us 4 or 6 weeks and we'll do everything from our side as government, but then you, NPA, need to ensure that you do, you start prosecuting all these cases that Advocate Batoy, you say that you plan to do. And at the moment, because we don't see that game plan, Sakina, I think that happens. Maybe my last point is we see the NPA grappling at times. We see it saying to big companies who wish to settle through so-called deferred prosecution agreements that they'll pay big fines. The NPA announces that with a lot of fanfare, but there's no real criminal action for it. So these are the very low-hanging fruit that are grasped at by the NPA because they know the public needs to see action. And the question is are those kind of actions, the deals that are made with corporations to pay big fines, going to ensure the lasting change at unseating the state capture network? And I think right now, I think the public has very good reason to be concerned.
But those plea incentives, if we just focus on that for a moment, and we did see the NPA revealing that it is actively considering requests for plea incentives by some of the accused companies in the multi-million rand corruption case involving Kusile, for example. Would that be the right route, though, to get into these plea incentives with people and companies who have committed acts of financial crimes against the government and institutions who have contributed to the failing of our state-owned enterprises?
Yeah, so Sakina, that's a very good example, as you say, around Kusile and Eskom more generally, the big Swiss multinational company, ABB, so massive engineering company, which has had a long business history in South Africa, is the company that was directly implicated there in wrongdoing and has also, following pressure by the American authorities, has agreed to enter into an agreement with the South African authorities and, as we said, pay back many millions of rands. That in part is fine if you are sure that that process is going to deliver is that you're going to be able to go after the high level political and other network that was involved in state capture. Firstly, that isn't clear. But secondly, there's a track record of around the globe of awarding what are called deferred prosecution agreements. So this argument that you can pay a big fine, a hefty fine, there'll be an amnesty effectively that's granted against you, and as long as you don't do this again, not to worry, we'll ensure that there won't be any prosecution of any of your executives. And I think that what we've seen in the United States and the United Kingdom and other places where this is often used is it's used as a means by the corporations to pay big, hefty fines. They have in fact build them into their balance sheets quite often, so they anticipate the payment of those fines. The big banks are good examples that are implicated in state capture in South Africa, like HSBC. SABC and others prepared to pay billions of rands in fines, often in the United States. And then we find 4 or 5 years later, banks like HSBC have been implicated in similar egregious crimes that seek to undermine governance in various countries and have a disastrous impact on human rights. And what do? They are fined again. And so we see this very abusive relationship between such corporations and countries continue. And I think the argument is what we need to see is the payment of fines, definitely, and there can be some understanding around that. But ultimately, what we need to see is the kind of payment of fines, firstly, that undoes the social damage and the harm that these corporations, for example, or politicians for that matter, have created. And secondly, there has to be an element of prosecutions of individuals in those processes as well, so that the executives and the directors don't feel that they can walk away scot-free. I think at the moment, these deals are loaded on the side of the powerful and the big corporations. And I think it would be folly for the NPA to go down that route. And certainly there's a clamor of corporations that are working through lobbyists and NGOs at the moment to try and make the point that this is the only route that the NPA must go. And I think what we're saying is the NPA needs to step back. It needs to tell the public what its game plan is. It needs to be capacitated to do what needs to be done. And then we need to see that followed through. And right now, I don't think we're seeing sufficient evidence of that from Advocate Batoy and her team.
As you said, perhaps not sufficient pressure being put on Advocate Batoy, to basically lay out the sort of plans that they have so that everybody knows what's going on. But if you think back in May, for example, Hennie, Advocate Batoy told Parliament that the NPA's investigating directorate is on the brink of making significant progress on some of these state capture investigations. But what have we seen in recent months following that announcement?
Yeah, so I think we've seen, at that point, I think, Sakina, all we had really seen were the prosecutions around Estina, for example, in terms of the state capture. So the famous Gupta-funded dairy farm in the Free State, where farmers suffered the brunt of the state capture and corruption involved there. I do think that we have seen some additional movement, not necessarily, as I said, against the big corporations at the moment, but we do get a sense, at least, that the cases that are being the cases that have been constructed around state-owned enterprises like Transnet and others are coming together. We have an indication of a real political tussle right now, and I'm just trying to talk on the positive side of the balance, where the NPA, for example, and we understand the investigative directorate, is in a tussle with the State Security Agency to ensure that various material related to criminal activities involving South Africa's state security agencies who spied on civil society, on students, that we believe corrupted judges who were involved in the state capture project as well, or at least a judge, that information is to be held by the NPA. State security is saying no, even that information of criminal wrongdoing you can't have access to. This was the information that was initially aired at the Zondo Commission, Sakina. So I think those are incredibly important moves. And I think that while they may look like a political tussle, they're at the very core of a battle that's playing itself out between those who wish to see reform, for example, within the NPA, and the anti-reformists, the people that are implicated in state capture, who still sit in agencies like state security within the Hawks and a range of other criminal justice agencies and state agencies at the moment. So there, I think we do see some important movement that has been taking place, and I think we've had additional promises from Advocate Shamala Batoy that we must see more prosecutions. But, we can use many examples where there seems to be adequate evidence of state capture, and PRASA is one of those, a network of German companies, of high-level individuals, including a chairperson of a parliamentary committee, Mr. Sifiso Buthelezi, who was chairperson of PRASA during the state capture period. We don't see those individuals being tackled and prosecuted for crimes that have impacted millions of commuters. And today, tens of thousands of people would have stood unnecessarily in lines for taxis, for buses that didn't arrive on time, precisely because of the state capture and an organ like PRASA. We need to see the NPA, Sakina, maybe to make the point, ensure that the corporations and the individuals who are linked to state capture in a state-owned enterprise like PRASA are prosecuted because the public demands it and they feel it. Working class people feel this on a daily basis. And that is is a responsibility of these individuals who we are paying and whose pensions we are paying, who fulfill these important roles within organizations like the NPA.
And just a final question, perhaps, Hennie, speaking about the Zondo Commission and what we've just discussed about the NPA and where things are perhaps not moving as speedily as they could or should. Could it be that the NPA wants to consolidate its work with the outcomes of the Zondo Commission that is due to issue its report?
Sakina, I don't think that would be good enough reason. So the Zondo Commission, as you say, is wrapping up its work. Those recommendations will be submitted to the president within a matter of weeks at this point. So by January, and I think the president, we would hope, will make the findings public as speedily as possible. There's no need to sit for months and review the findings of the commission. But having said that, that information should be the subject of access by the NPA. So the NPA should have access to evidence generally that's been collected in the process of the Zondo Commission. And we know that there have been, in fact, agreements that would take place. My understanding is that that's not happening sufficiently, and so that you haven't had enough information sharing from the side of the Zondo Commission with the NPA to enable the NPA to speed up its prosecution processes. I think what we're hoping, given that the Zondo Commission now needs to effectively archive all that material that it has, is that everything must be that it has not yet handed over to the NPA and to the investigative directorate, and for that matter, the Special Investigation Unit and other agencies must be handed wholesale over to them to ensure speedy prosecutions. It's been, as we know, an incredibly expensive exercise, over R1 billion invested. And I think it's been important in terms of transparency, of understanding. We haven't always seen all the powerful actors. And again, I stress, we haven't seen the big corporations hauled before the Zondo Commission. So it's certainly, to my mind, had certain failings. But on the whole, it's produced an important volume of evidence. And that must now be used by the criminal justice agencies effectively to ensure that the prosecutions of these powerful corporations and individuals follow.
Hennie, we'll leave it there. Thanks so much for your time this morning. Director of Open Secrets, Hennie van Vuuren, discussing the NPA's performance almost 3 years after what was viewed as a strategic appointment at the NPA and the revitalization of the law enforcement state organ. And just taking a look at some of what has happened, what has not happened, what ought to, and maybe some of the pressure that should be brought to bear on the NPA to get things moving.